What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but now we have to jump back over to some more Wolverine comics. Now remember, by this point in our coverage over the X-Men, we are currently working our way up to Fatal Attractions, the next crossover that we have to talk about on my channel when it comes to the X-Men. Now, as we all know, Wolverine plays a very important role in Fatal Attractions. So yes, we have to jump back over to his comics to kind of get ready to discuss the whole idea of Wolverine losing something very important to him. But we have not reached that point yet. Instead, we have to cover another story that takes place before that big moment. Now, in the early 1990s, when it came to Wolverine comics, they were written by one guy, Larry Hama. Now, really, when it came to Larry, his main goal was to give us different pieces of the actual origin of Wolverine. Not the complete origin, but just small pieces here and there. But occasionally, he would give us different stories that did not really tackle the origin of Wolverine. Instead, there'll be stories about Wolverine going on some crazy adventures across the world with his sidekick, Jubilee. And so today's video is one of those crazy storylines where you have Wolverine with Jubilee going on a crazy adventure. But I kind of like the story a lot. And the reason why, because we do learn more about the actual origin of Jubilee. We can save the origin of Jubilee for the later chapters of this video. Instead, we're going to go ahead and get into Wolverine issue number 72. Now, when we do, we actually pick up with Wolverine and Jubilee in Australia. Now, this is a callback to the Chris Claremont days of the X-Men. And let me explain. You see, with Chris Claremont, there was a point where in Fall of the Mutants, the second X-Men crossover ever, you had the X-Men fighting against a character known as the Adversary. Now, the Adversary was a very powerful being, but the only way to beat him was to make sure that he was not able to come back into the main Marvel universe. And so you had our heroes give up their lives to make sure that he would not have a way to get back into the main Marvel universe. The problem is that they did that on live television. And so to the entire world, the X-Men had died at that moment. But in reality, they were brought back to life. And the world had no idea they were brought back to life. And so to the X-Men, what they did was they hid in the shadows to go after all their different enemies. And so they needed a new base. And their new base was the Outback base in Australia. Now, after a few story arcs, the X-Men actually lost their base to the Reavers. Now, the Reavers are a group of cyborgs that were being led by a character known as Donald Pierce. Now, for Donald Pierce and the Reavers, they were able to catch Wolverine. But thanks to Jubilee, they were able to get away from the Reavers. Now, the Reavers kept the base even though they lost Wolverine and the rest of the X-Men. But then they lost their base to the Sentinels. And technically, they lost their base to the future version of the Sentinels. Let me explain. You see, there was this character known as Fitzroy. And when it came to Fitzroy, he came from the far future, the same future that Bishop did. Now, for Fitzroy, when he came back to the present day, he had joined an organization called Upstart. Now, when it came to Upstart, the whole idea of that group was they played a game. And the game was to kill off people, mutants or cyborgs, whoever. Now, his thing was, if you kill off people, you would get points. Now, the way to earn more points was to kill off more powerful characters. And so for Fitzroy, his main target was at first the Reavers to get a lot of points, but to also kill off characters like Donald Pierce and also Lady Deathstrike. Now, that took place a while ago. And so Wolverine and Jubilee, they came back here to make sure that there's no possibility of a future threat down the road. They wanted to make sure this place is completely abandoned. And honestly, it is completely abandoned. Now, for Wolverine and Jubilee, they do find this lab. Now, this lab belonged to two people, Donald Pierce, and also Spiral. Now, Donald Pierce, like I said earlier, was the leader of the Reavers, a group of cyborgs who wanted to hunt down the mutant race. And Donald Pierce was a cyborg as well, but he also created the Reavers. He turned them into cyborgs. Now, the other person, Spiral, she is a character that we had talked about before. You see, she is from the Mojoverse, and the Mojoverse is this pocket dimension in the Marvel universe. Now, she's also from the future as well, from that universe. And that is how crazy her entire origin is. Now, honestly, there's more details, but for the sake of this video, you don't need to know all of that. But either way, those two characters, this lab belongs to them. And the reason why I'm saying that because in that lab, there were special kind of containers. Now, with those containers, they were holding special kind of chemicals that are being used to help create cyborgs. And so Wolverine said, you know what? It's also weird that this lab is still technically being powered. And so you have Wolverine go ahead and turn off the power in that lab. Now, here comes the big problem, though. You see, underneath the lab, there was a Sentinel that was technically in sleep mode because the power was on. But once you had Wolverine turn the power off, well, that thing came back to life. It was turned back on. Now, for Wolverine and Jubilee, they did not realize it had turned back on, and they had continued to go deeper into the actual Outback base. But they didn't have Logan tell us that they need to check in on Gateway. You see, Gateway was a mutant that had the ability to, well, open up gateways to allow people to be teleported almost anywhere across the world. Now, also for Gateway, he had the ability to talk to you through his mind. Now, it wasn't like he was very verbal through his talks in your mind, but you kind of knew what he was thinking once he was able to connect his mind to your mind. Now, when it came to Gateway, he was technically being forced to work for the Reavers. But the question was, what happened after the Reavers were killed off by the Sentinels? We had no idea. So Wolverine said, you know what? Let's figure out what exactly happened to Gateway after all that mess went down. But while you have Wolverine and Jubilee going out of their way to find Gateway, well, you did have a Sentinel we saw earlier who just reactivated, get back up, and begin the process of actually healing itself. Because remember, this one's from the future, and so that means it has more advanced technology. It has the ability now to actually repair itself. Now, once it's done repairing itself, it realized that there were two mutants nearby, and so it flies over to Wolverine and Jubilee. But getting back over to Wolverine and also, well, Jubilee, we actually see them go to the spot where Gateway is usually at. The problem is that Gateway is not there. Now, like I said earlier, when it comes to Gateway, he has the ability to open up portals that would allow people to teleport almost anywhere across the world. Now, here's the thing. That was the early days of Gateway. This is now Larry Hama beginning the process saying like, no, Gateway is more powerful than you actually know, because Gateway has the ability to leave open gateways that could possibly help you time travel as well. And so for Jubilee and Wolverine, they find a gateway that was, well, technically left behind by Gateway. And you have Jubilee actually touch the gateway, and it takes her back in time to the point where she was a young girl, but the night where she lost her parents. This is the moment where we begin to learn more about the actual origin of Jubilee. You see, we had learned that a long time ago, Jubilee had lost her parents. But for Jubilee, she had believed that her parents had died in some horrible car accident. Now, technically, that is true, but there's more to the actual story. You see, we learned that apparently two guys had broken into the home of Jubilee and her parents. And once they did, they kidnapped her parents. Now, the only reason why they did not kidnap Jubilee, because she was away with one of her friends shopping at the mall. And so for Jubilee, she was actually safe. But her parents, they were kidnapped. And so these two guys, they staged the entire car accident, making it seem like it was a complete accident. But in reality, her parents were murdered. And so for Jubilee, with her being able to go back in time and see what actually happens, she now knows the actual truth. that her parents were not killed in just a random car accident, they were actually murdered. Now, before we are able to dive deeper into the origin of Jubilee, we have to jump back over to that Sentinel. Here's the reason why, because you actually had a Sentinel wanting to go after Wolverine and Jubilee, but then it looks up into the sky and it sees the stars. And this begins a whole new process for this one Sentinel. Now, getting back over to the origin of Jubilee, this is where we learn that apparently there was a moment in time where she had just disappeared. Now, she had no idea why, and her friends wondered why as well too, where she went to. She was gone for a few seconds, and I'll explain why here in a moment. But once she got back home, that was the moment where she was informed that her parents had died. Now, after that, she was kind of forced to live with her neighbors, the Lees. Now, the Lees are going to be somewhat important to the actual origin of Jubilee. But once she had arrived at their house, she realized that she did not want to be there at all. And so she ran away. But that is when you have the Sentinel arrive to explain things to Jubilee, to tell her why she had disappeared for a few minutes back in the past. You see, when it came to her being gone for a few seconds, it was only because her future self, the present day self, went back in time at that exact moment to figure out what happened to her parents. But her past self was also in that same time point. And so time said, you can't have your past self and your future self in the same exact moment in time. One of y'all have to disappear. And so technically, they had switched spots. But once you had Jubilee go back to the present day, her past self went back to the past. And so that explains why she was gone for a few seconds around her friends. Now, for Wolverine and Jubilee, they are very surprised to actually see a Sentinel not trying to attack them, but actually talk to them. And so you had a Sentinel say, hey, listen, I have now become sentient. And the reason why, because the same kind of chemicals that Donald Pierce and Spyro used to create cyborgs, that chemicals had failed on the Sentinel. And so because those chemicals, it turned him into a sentient being. Now, for the Sentinel, it realized that all humans are going to lead the world to its end. And so now it has completely changed its program. So you know what? To make sure the Earth actually survive, but also the Sentinels as well, I need to find a way to kill all life across the entire world. And so Wolverine, realizing that this Sentinel may be sentient now, but now it has a new goal: to get rid of humans and mutants all at once. Now, you do have Wolverine and Jubilee try to fight against it, but the battle ends with a Sentinel being able to grab Jubilee and tells Wolverine, if you take one step forward, I will break her neck in a matter of seconds. And so as we dive into Wolverine issue number 73, we pick up with Wolverine trying to figure out how in the world is he going to be able to save the life of Jubilee, but at the same time, stop the Sentinel as well. Now, Wolverine, unfortunately, he can't do much. Now, for the Sentinel, his main goal right now is to find a way to kill off all life across the entire world. Now, for the Sentinel, it does enter the time vortex that was left behind by Gateway. Now, you would think like, okay, that means our heroes plus the robot, they're going to go back in time or possibly into the future. They don't. They just go to a different place on Earth. Either way, they all travel through the vortex that was left behind by Gateway. And so we see all our different characters actually arrive at Ant Hill. Now, Ant Hill is really important to the early days of Marvel Comics, really more the Avenger comics. But once you have our heroes arrive at this location, you then have Wolverine trying to fight against the Sentinel to save the life of Jubilee. Now, he was actually able to free her. The problem was that he was not watching his back at all. And so because of that, you then had a Sentinel being able to blast Wolverine right in the back. And so now he is severely injured. Now, when it came to Larry Hama, he was really trying his best to tell us that Wolverine has a healing factor, but it's not as strong as folks believed it was in the early 1990s. It was him saying, yes, he may have a healing factor, but he still needs time to properly heal up. Now, in present day comics, his healing factor is completely wild, but at this point in time, it was more of like, yes, he has one, but he needs time to properly heal. And so right now, Wolverine is completely out, which means that right now it's up to Jubilee to actually protect him from the Sentinel. Now, this is a huge moment for her character because now we're going to find out that her powers got a tad bit of upgrade to the point where she is actually able to do some big time damage to the Sentinel. Now, after she was able to do that, she then passes out. And so now both characters are down for the count. And so for the Sentinel, it's more of like, listen, they are down, but I'm also severely injured. I'm going to go ahead and go inside and heal to properly heal up and continue on with my master plan to kill off all life across the entire world. Now, for this Sentinel, it actually believes that it's no longer just a regular robot. It now truly believes that it's actually a sentient being. But either way, we're seeing it once again being able to properly heal. But it's also causing a lot of commotion in the actual base of Ant Hill to the point where you have Jubilee wake back up and realize there's something big currently happening inside the actual Ant Hill base. And so her goal right now is to wake up Wolverine. The problem is that Wolverine still needs time to properly heal up. It's Larry once again saying like, hey guys, even though Wolverine has a healing factor, he still needs time to actually heal up. And so right now, you have Wolverine telling Jubilee, leave me alone. Leave me here so that I am able to properly heal up. Right now, you are annoying me. But to her, it's kind of like, hey man, listen, I need your help because apparently that robot is up to something truly evil. Now, let's have a quick conversation about the whole idea of Ant Hill. You see, Ant Hill first appeared back in Avengers issue number 103 and 104. Now, in that two-part story arc, we had learned that there was a group of Sentinels who had built a base in Australia called Ant Hill. And they also had this project called the Solar Flare Project. Their main goal was to cause a solar flare to kill off all life across the entire world. And so for this Sentinel, it's kind of like, hey, this is the perfect idea for me to find a way to kill off all life across the entire world, especially the human race. And so this Sentinel wants to pick up where they left off at. But now I want to jump back over to Wolverine and also Jubilee. And here's the reason why. Because you have Jubilee begin to talk about the idea of getting revenge against the people who had killed off her parents. Now for Wolverine, he fully understands what Jubilee is going through because at first she believed that her parents died in some horrible car accident. But in reality, they were just flat out murdered. And so Wolverine said, listen, I understand that you want to get revenge, but at the same time, that kind of revenge might lead you down a dark path that you do not want to take. And trust me, I would know. Now, once you have Wolverine being able to properly heal up, that is the moment where you do have some wild animals appear and they try to attack Jubilee and Wolverine. Now for Logan, he is able to show off his wild side. And once he does that, he actually put the fear in these wild animals to scare them away. And so for Jubilee, she was very impressed to see what Wolverine did to those wild animals. But now for Logan and Jubilee, they have to focus. They have to go ahead and go after the Sentinel because right now he's up to something and they have no idea what he's up to just yet. That is when they realize what he is actually up to because they see his gun. Now this gun or cannon is going to be used to cause the solar flare. And so for Wolverine, he now knows what he has to do. He has to stop this Sentinel. But the problem is that you then had a Sentinel begin to attack Wolverine and also Jubilee. Now, while you had the two sides fighting against each other, you then have the Sentinel begin to call out some random numbers. Now for Wolverine, he has truly forgotten what that means. But for Jubilee, she definitely knows what that means because when it comes to Sentinels, they all have their assigned number. It's kind of like their name. And so for this Sentinel, we learned that he had found some of the Sentinels that were left behind in Ant Hill, and he was able to properly heal them up so that they're able to help him out with his actual mission of the Solar Flare project, but to also help out to get rid of Wolverine and Jubilee. And so by the end of this chapter, we see our heroes now surrounded by a group of Sentinels. And so getting into the final chapter for today's video, we actually pick up with Wolverine and Jubilee trying their best to fight against, well, all the Sentinels. Now, really, our two heroes are able to hold their own. Well, really, it's pure luck. But either way, you do have our heroes being able to do some severe damage to at least one of the Sentinels. Now, you did have our heroes go ahead and run back into the base, deeper into the base of Ant Hill. Now, the opening pages of this final chapter is really more of Larry Hama trying to use these pages to give out a message. And what I mean is that the Sentinel from the future, it did become sentient, but it did not gain the ability of empathy. And the reason why I'm saying that because the one Sentinel that got severely injured by Wolverine and Jubilee, it cries out for help. It cries out for the idea of hopefully being repaired. But the one from the future, it goes ahead and takes out that Sentinel out of his misery. Because of him, it's kind of like, why should I help repair you? Because you are severely damaged. You are basically useless. It did not really care that his fallen brother just needed some more help, or at least wanted some more time on this planet. And so you have our sentient Sentinel go on to hunt down Wolverine and Jubilee. But getting back over to our heroes, you do have our heroes continuing to run deeper into Ant Hill. Unfortunately, they are then surrounded by more Sentinels. And so it does kind of lead into an actual battle between our heroes and these other Sentinels. Now, these Sentinels are from the present day. They're not from the future like the main one is. Either way, you do have Wolverine and Jubilee being able to actually take one of them out by really cutting off his head. Now, this is really important. And the reason why, because the one who was not severely damaged begins to feel very worried about the other one who was severely damaged, to the point where it told Wolverine and Jubilee to leave his fellow brother alone. Now, the problem is that because the other Sentinel's head was just hanging around with all those cores hanging out, all those cores touch his fellow Sentinel and it overload both their systems. And so they both completely shut down. But for Jubilee, she felt completely sorry for the idea that one of the Sentinels was just trying his best to save his fallen brother. But unfortunately, with all those cores, it overpowered both of their systems and they both had died. Now, the one Sentinel from the future, it does get very confused by Jubilee and Wolverine because it realized that Jubilee had just expressed empathy. Wolverine did too, but really more Jubilee than Wolverine. Either way, because you haven't realized that Jubilee and Wolverine has shown empathy, it also realized that it does not have all the different emotions that we humans have. Even though it became sentient, it's not fully sentient in the way of having all the different kinds of emotions. And so you didn't have this future Sentinel say, you know what, he needs to leave for a few years, and really more like 2,137 years, to kind of reprogram itself so that it will have the ability to have all these different kinds of emotions. Now, before it does leave and really stop its whole entire plan of killing off the entire human race, it does ask Wolverine and Jubilee, where do they want to go when it comes to going back home? And you have Wolverine say, hey, matter of fact, how about this? Take us back over to LA. We need to go to LA for a special type of reason. Now, the reason why Wolverine and Jubilee went over to LA is to find the two people who had, basically killed off her parents. Now, they were able to find them very quickly. And really, you have Jubilee being able to take them both down very easily. But now the question is she going to kill them? Now, for Wolverine, it's more of like, listen, I said go ahead and kill them, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you do kill them, you're not going to feel any types of difference at all, meaning that all you did is just kill off two people who had killed off your parents. But you would then be labeled as a killer. You would then walk down a dark path as that killer. And the thing is, do you think your parents would want that for you? And so really it's more Wolverine kind of talking Jubilee out of the idea of killing off people because he knows that's not who she is at all. And he hates the idea of putting her on that dark path. And so you have Jubilee being able to just, well, walk away. And so once she does, you then have Wolverine and Jubilee just head back home. And this is the end of today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But also, guys, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below because you never know. Your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.